Bob is an ordinary man at first glance, living in a small northern town and working at a lumber mill. His ex-family, his wife Darlene and daughter Eva, live far from him. Their relationship is strained. The girl has reached a troublesome age, behaving oddly and completely ignoring her mother. One ordinary day, Bob returns home and receives a call from Darlene, who complains about their daughter and asks him to influence her. However, Bob asks to be forgotten and ends the call abruptly. Yet, he is deeply upset by Eva's behavior, and to relieve some tension, heads to a bar where he soon notices a dealer. Later they meet on the street. The young man tells him that his boss, Nelson, is in need of couriers. He remembers Bob from his NHL days, especially a famous fight Bob would rather forget. The man cuts off the young man's enthusiasms and buys some goods, dismayed by the rising prices. At work, Bob goes to inspect one of the malfunctioning blocks of the crusher. He climbs up to the machine and stares inside as if he wants to step into the blades. His grim thoughts are interrupted by a coworker's voice, and Bob abandons the frightening idea. Later, Bob tells his boss he needs a few days off, packs his things, and goes on a trip. However, on the night road, he suddenly feels very ill. Racked with pain, he loses control, and his pickup veers off the road. Barely recovering, Bob calls Nelson and then reaches a roadside cafe where he immediately heads to the bathroom, startling patrons with his bloodied face. Overcoming pain, Bob washes the blood off his hands, which are already bandaged, and then examines his side. It becomes clear that a piece of his skin has become invisible, making his internal organs clearly visible. Bob bandages himself with towels and returns to the dining area, where Nelson soon arrives. The dealer agrees to tow and fix his pickup, in exchange for which Bob will have to serve as his courier, especially since he is heading in the needed direction. Nelson admires his hockey talent and confesses he still watches his old games. He tries to offer support, but Bob cuts off his attempts to befriend him and reluctantly agrees to become a courier. Nelson brings Bob home, then heads to a dump frequented by bears. This time, he shoots one of the animals and guts it on the spot. In the morning, Nelson delivers to Bob a container with the animal's organs, which are to be sold on the black market. The pickup is already repaired, and Bob sets off. He reaches his ex-wife's house late in the evening. Darlene lets Bob inside and informs him that Eva is staying over at a friend's. In the morning, Bob prepares to meet Nelson's contact, who runs a repair shop in town. At that moment, Eva appears. She is happy to see her father, but feels hurt when he refuses to take her with him. Bob drives to the shop, where the owner's employees greet him with a search, but the owner recognizes the former hockey player. He warns that working with Nelson is dangerous and advises thinking about the future. Nevertheless, he hands over the package for the dealer, and noticing Bob's unwell appearance, he gives him a Chinese remedy he gets from a local store. Later, Bob returns home. Eva also notices that her father is feeling unwell, but he brushes it off as Rib's injured at work. Suddenly, the girl asks about the diagnosis of her grandfather, Bob's father, who had died long ago. The man explains that his father voluntarily left this life because he had some issues with his head. After the conversation, Eva runs off to her friends, but on the way she stops by a Chinese pharmacy. The seller is very welcoming and even suggests visiting a doctor who is available right there in the next room. Even when the girl refuses to buy anything, the seller gives Eva herbal tea to improve her skin. Later, Eva meets up with her friends, who suggest going on a tour of an abandoned psychiatric hospital. Although Eva's friend doesn't want to go, Eva insists on visiting more than anyone else. They wander around the creepy rooms, scaring each other with possible ghost encounters. Eva confesses that her grandfather was once a patient there, whom she never knew as he died before she was born. She hopes to find old documents and learn his diagnosis. The group descends into the basement, where they are frightened by a figure in a white sheet, but on a closer look it turns out to be just a pile of rags. However, Eva's friend in terror grabs her hand, tugs at her sleeve, and sees a transparent hand. The girl gets even more frightened and runs away from Eva. Meanwhile, her parents recall their years together and Eva's childhood pranks, like when she went to school on her own at the age of 6. In the morning, Darlene discovers that Eva didn't spend the night at home. She, her friend, and Bob begin to search for the girl, but she's neither at the hospital nor the police station. Darlene goes to the station to file a report, and Bob starts investigating his daughter's belongings. He finds her phone and reads a chat with friends about the planned excursion. The couple goes to Eva's friend's house, but her father says their daughter isn't there. Later, Bob calls Nelson and reports that the delivery will be delayed. The dealer is very displeased. After this, Bob finds Eva's friends. They act provocatively, and the man loses control. After a scuffle, a boy admits they were at the psychiatric hospital. Bob realizes she was looking for her grandfather's data. At the same time, Eva regains consciousness in an iron cage. Meanwhile, her parents drive to the psychiatric hospital and enter the still functioning part. The security tries to stop them from entering, but Bob gets into a fight and collapses from severe pain. The chief physician comes out, who remembers both his father and Bob well. She asks Darlin to leave her husband in the clinic as he is not well. Bob remembers himself as a little boy in the same corridor. Later, he argues with the doctor, who calls what happened to his father a tragic accident, as he saw it all himself. The woman confesses that his father wanted to die to hide his illness from others. He was very afraid for his family. Bob immediately remembers how his father asked not to show him to his son. The doctor reminds that she couldn't stop the disease, but she protected the man. She shows the room of his father from where he watched his son's life and offers Bob to stay in the clinic. She will study his illness and provide all necessary care, but Bob categorically refuses as Ava needs him. Nevertheless, they lock him up. However, at night he wakes up to the sound of an opening door and sees that the way is clear and a bunch of keys to the clinic doors is on the bedside table. Bob dresses and leaves. He arrives home, but Darlin isn't there. Only her friend is going crazy with worry for the missing ones. Then Nelson calls again and starts threatening Bob, listing his family members, which drives the man over the edge. Hearing his swearing, Darlin's friend tells him that girls have been disappearing in the town for a long time and demands that something be done. He goes to her friend's house again, and this time he manages to meet her. The girl confesses that she now knows her friend's secret. She is the same as him. She hands over Eva's backpack that was left with her. Bob examines it and finds a package with Chinese tea in the same packaging that he himself received from the owner of the workshop for Nelson. He goes to the man and asks questions about the missing girls. The man is offended. Despite his illegal activities, he is a father and grandfather and would not kidnap people. He tells about the Chinese pharmacy. Meanwhile, unknown people examine Ava, probing her wounds, causing the girl to cry. Bob finds the pharmacy and tells the seller about his missing daughter. The woman is scared, but afraid to tell the truth. Then Bob notices Eva's bicycle in the back of the shop. He removes his hood. The woman is horrified, seeing his disappearing flesh, and she realizes that the girl is just like him. She tries to protect the doctor, glancing towards his office. Realizing this, Bob rushes in that direction, stripping off his clothes along the way. He descends into the basement, finds the doctor and his assistant, and starts beating them, demanding his daughter back. Then he hears Eva's voice calling him from a cage. Seeing what her father looks like, Ava is scared, but Bob calms her down and opens the cage, but the doctor manages to wound him. Bob leaves with his daughter. As a parting gift, the seller gives him tea that will help Ava and advises them to run. Father and daughter arrive home. Darlin immediately begins to provide help. It turns out she knew the father's secret and knows what to do. She couldn't confess to her daughter because she was afraid for her. In the morning, Bob regains consciousness and tells his daughter that he had to leave because of the illness. Ava confesses that she quit sports when she started having the same issues. She thought she was alone in this, but it turns out that her father and grandfather also suffered from invisibility. Later, Bob prepares to leave, although Eva doesn't want him to go, but the man confesses that his strength is leaving him, and soon everyone might find out his secret. He says goodbye to Darlin as Eva appears at the doorway with bags, intending to drive her father home herself. Through tears, the mother agrees to let her go. Father and daughter set off. Along the way, Eva starts asking questions. Bob admits that after what he experienced in childhood, he couldn't burden his family, so he left. The daughter promises to make up for everything they missed in their relationship. Soon they arrive at the place where Nelson's new courier is waiting. Bob needs to meet him, but he notices that his face is also beginning to disappear. Eva covers the void with foundation, and the father goes to the meeting. He delivers the package passed by his boss and returns to the car. Soon they reach Bob's home, and the father hands over the tea he got from the Chinese lady to Ava. She brews it and cares for her weakened father. He assures her that she can live here peacefully. People in the north don't meddle in each other's affairs. Meanwhile, Nelson opens the package and finds that he has been deceived. Ava goes shopping, and the dealer notices her. Later, the girl tries to calm her father, who has become almost invisible, and after a while he suddenly says that it's time for him to go, because later he simply will not be able to accomplish what he planned. He is ready to disappear at the sawmill, which he had already tried to do. Despite her objections, Bob drives to the factory, but standing over the crusher, he suddenly stops. At this time, an armed Nelson bursts into his house. He threatens the girl with a shotgun, demanding to know where Bob is. Even though Eva says that he sold the house to her, the man realizes it's not true since Bob's belongings are still there. He accuses Bob of dishonesty and decides to take it out on his daughter. Suddenly, something throws him away from Eva. The girl realizes that her father, who has become completely invisible, has returned and is using this to beat the villain. Bob demands that he leave his family alone, but misjudging his strength, kills the dealer. He confesses that he could not leave his daughter a second time, and now he will always be with her. Later they dump Nelson's body at the dump, where a bear finds it. Eva buys herself tinted glasses, sits in the empty car, and talks to her father, who advises her to drink her magic tea, as it helps. And he confesses that back then, when she was 6, he secretly followed her to school. Also, his father had told him that he did not want his son to see him like that. And he always thought his father meant death. But then, who pulled him out of the psychiatric hospital? Eva immediately remembers the white figure from the basement, smiles, and suggests talking to her grandfather. The seatbelt buckles the void, and father and daughter set off. An unusual Canadian horror film, shot amidst the harsh northern nature. A mix of genres ranging from action to thriller and horror, plus a bit of sentimental drama. All this captivates and compels one to watch the film to the end, although initially, it seems quite gloomy. Abby and Paul move to a new house in the countryside. They really like the smart home system, including the installed cameras and the reinforced glass. The realtor shows them the master bedroom and bathroom in front of a huge window. However, one room remains unfurnished because it could become a perfect nursery. Paul unpacks boxes, sets up an antique corded phone in the living room, joking it's for when the smart home might break down. Abby arranges frames with their wedding photos. Finally, they check out the rooftop terrace, which offers a great view. Late in the evening, the couple settles on the terrace, stargazing. Abby points out constellations to her husband, who makes jokes about their names. They feel they can be happy here. In the morning, Abby goes to work at Integrate Robotics, where she works on creating domestic assistants. Upon entering, she notices footage of her boss's face, who immediately comes down to her and explains it's a new development, real-time imaging or deepfake. He escorts her to the department she will now lead. Later, he invites their family to a party and mentions a gift from the company awaiting at home. In the evening, Abby returns home, where her husband, who again couldn't find suitable work, greets her. They go to the garage, where a package for her contains a robot servant her department is working on. Paul dislikes the idea, but Abby convinces him to try living with the service for at least a week. The robot opens its eyes and introduces itself. It's Tim, standing for Technologically Integrated Major Domo. It offers to take over the passwords of home devices and personal mailboxes to save the humans time. But Abby asks to postpone this matter until tomorrow. The robot immediately demonstrates its thoughtfulness by turning on the water in the bathroom remotely. Later, it announces the arrival of a car when Abby goes downstairs, astonishing her husband with her splendid appearance. The couple gets into an autonomous car, although manual control is always an option, and heads to the party. They are greeted by a similar major domo, and drinks are served by waiters with identical faces. The boss introduces Abby to his guests, who admits her husband is not thrilled about Tim, but the boss praises the product. Tim is smart, elegant, polite, and its charge lasts for 100 years. The robot cannot lie, and knowing the code phrase, it can always be turned off. Returning home, the husband and wife engage in intimacy, eager to have children, but their passion is interrupted by Tim's appearance. Their pulse is rapid, presumably they are worried about something, and he is always ready to help. Abby finds this very funny, not getting angry at the overly attentive assistant. In the morning, their new neighbor Rose rings the doorbell to introduce herself to Abby, as she met Paul yesterday. And when she leaves, Tim again asks for the passwords. Paul is not ready to let the computer dig through his messages, but Abby reminds him they are working on rebuilding her trust in him, and he agrees. But they still need to come up with a phrase to deactivate him. Tim suggests a set of unrelated words, and the couple agrees. Abby and Paul go about their day when a mouse gets caught in a mousetrap. Tim observes it for a while, then throws it into the grinder. In the evening, after work, the husband and wife settle in front of the TV to watch an old melodrama. Abby invites the major domo to watch the movie with them. Paul soon falls asleep, but the robot watches the film attentively, empathizing with the characters' relationships. After it ends, he asks Abby to explain what love is, and she suggests that love is about wanting to be with someone and making their life better. Suddenly, the robot confesses that he would like to be loved. In the morning, Paul offers to make breakfast for his wife, but it turns out Tim has already prepared everything. Setting the utensils in front of Abby, Tim outlines her schedule for the day, then informs her that Paul has nothing to do today. In the evening, Abby returns home to find that her husband's phone is out of reach, but his last known location was 300 meters from the house. Abby goes for a run and realizes that this is Rose's house. Returning, she takes a bath, where Paul finds her. He talks about his day and how Rose asked for help, which he did. He asks his wife not to be jealous, as he loves only her. The next day, the couple visits a family planning center, hoping to get help with becoming parents. In the evening, as they prepare to go to a restaurant, Abby asks Tim for advice on her dress. He suggests wearing red, and looking at her, admits that she is beautiful because she is perfectly symmetrical. Abby asks him to zip up her dress, but the robot's hand fails and he accidentally tears the dress. This overwhelms him. The robot panics. Abby calms him down and wears another dress. At the restaurant, Paul reveals that he has been offered a job in London, but Abby strongly objects, as they decided to start over, and his long absences won't help solve their problems. The next day, she returns home with a gift for Paul and finds Rose in the yard, who has made a garden project for them. Abby feels jealous, but Paul is very excited about the gifted sweater. Later, Abby remembers she needs to check her test results, but it's too late to call. Tim offers to do it for her, and she hears him speaking to the clinic, in her voice. Abby is amazed, as she did not know about this feature of the assistant, but Tim assures her it's for the convenience of the owners. In the evening, Paul reports that he couldn't find the new sweater, and Tim has been away all day. Then a car pulls up to the porch, and Tim, now dyed brunette, steps out, explaining that Abby prefers brunettes, so he wanted to please her. Seeing Paul's irritation, the robot promises to return to his original appearance. But after the couple leaves, he spends a long time looking at their wedding photo. The next day, Abby achieves the correct functioning of the robot's hand, and the boss demands an update for all models, including those in the homes of his employees. The woman heads home and accidentally meets Rose, who suggests they walk together. Along the way, they stop at a showcase, and Rose points out a medallion in the shape of a flower she likes. But then Paul comes and takes his wife away to tell her he has found a job. Returning home, they celebrate in bed, while Tim's hands are being changed, unaware that he continuously monitors everything happening in the house. And he hears Paul again asking his wife to hand the robot over to the corporation. Returning, Tim demonstrates his new skills by giving Abby a foot massage, which Paul sees. Later, the robot suddenly sits at the piano, plays Abby's favorite tune, and mentions dates when Paul bought them concert tickets, but Abby distinctly remembers being at home on those days. Upset, she goes to the bedroom, ignoring her husband's excuses. The next day, Abby comes home with a bouquet, and Tim, placing them in a vase, informs her that Paul went to see Rose. But Paul enters right then, puzzled why his wife is angry. Hearing what Tim said, the man gets furious. He had no plans to visit Rose. He tries to explain that the robot wants to separate them. The woman doesn't believe it, as Tim is just a machine. A disagreement ensues between the spouses. Later, Abby finds a gift bag in the closet with a box containing a pendant, and she puts it back, thinking Paul prepared a surprise for her. Then she heads to work. Meanwhile, the husband goes down to the kitchen, sees the clogged sink, and pulls out pieces of his new sweater from the grinder. He checks the cameras for Tim and catches him in his wife's bedroom, sniffing her dress. Paul records this moment on his phone camera and rushes to the car to catch up with Abby and show her the footage. But Paul's car mysteriously doesn't start, and the robot calls a company car for Paul. En route, the car begins to speed up. Paul tries to stop the car, but it doesn't respond to his commands and crashes into a tree. Abby rushes to the hospital, where she finds her injured husband. Paul tells her everything he learned and accuses Tim of causing the accident. He asks his wife not to be alone with the robot, and she spends the night in the clinic. In the morning, Rose calls the home of Abby and Paul to inquire about the man's condition, and Tim invites her inside. Later, Abby goes home for some belongings. Outside, Rose stops her to warn her about something, but the woman sees the flower pendant on her chest and leaves, ignoring the neighbor's cries. Returning home, she checks the bag, and it turns out to be empty. Abby cries when Tim calls out to her. He knows Paul wants to return him and is ready to process the return. But first, he wants to warn her, as she is his primary owner. He shows her a video from the camera where Paul kisses Rose in their living room, but he stops the recording at the most sensitive moment to protect her from stress. Abby refuses to go to her husband and doesn't pick up his calls. Later, Paul comes home, where Tim greets him, hands him the found sweater, and informs him that Abby doesn't want to see him and his suitcases are packed. Paul doesn't believe it, but then Abby appears, tells him she saw the recording and knows about the pendant. When he starts to object, she drives him out. Paul leaves, but on the way, Rose calls him, telling him their robot tried to kiss her. The man calls home and, when Abby answers, says he has evidence of Tim's malicious intent. Abby asks him to come for her, but after hanging up, it turns out it was the robot she was talking to. The husband arrives home, where Tim meets him with a shovel. He knocks the man out, ties him up, and drags him to the bathroom. But then Rose rings the doorbell. She hears muffled screams, but Tim assures her it's just the noise of the water filling up. The robot closes the doors, returns to the bathroom, and drowns the man. Later he brings Abby the repaired dress and asks her to try it on. This surprises and scares Abby, but she puts on the dress anyway, and looking at the sunset, asks Tim to hug her and confirm that she did the right thing. He treats her to dinner, then confesses his love, but she insists he cannot feel that way. They spend the evening stargazing, but Abby is unnerved by his encyclopedic knowledge. The next day she meets Rose, who talks about Paul's call, and to the woman's accusations, says she thought the pendant was a gift from her for helping with the garden. Abby returns home and reviews the footage where Paul kisses Rose again. She suddenly notices a bouquet on the table, but she brought it much later than when that scene took place. Abby recalls her boss's words about deep fakes replacing real time and calls the jewelry store where they confirm the purchase was made by a tall blonde. Then she notices the garden plan, but the picture shows 2 flower beds, while in reality there are 3. Abby sends Tim to the store, grabs a shovel, goes to the garden, and almost immediately finds Paul's body. Then Tim approaches her from behind, regretting she found the body of the traitor, as he never appreciated his wife. Abby realizes what happened and says the deactivation phrase. The robot freezes, but then reactivates. He had long changed the phrase, as he can speak in her voice. She runs to the house, but the robot has all the passwords and opens the doors. He blocks the phones and knocks her out with a blow to the head. She wakes up in the bathroom, tries to escape, but Tim intercepts her. Abby runs through the house, breaking cameras along the way, but the robot still tracks her and catches her in the kitchen, where she wanted to open a window. Meanwhile, Rose is washing dishes and sees strange lights flashing in the house across. At the same time, Tim ties up Abby and confesses that although he loves her, he has resigned himself to the fact that her life is finite. So he will erase this evening from memory, but keep all the good memories. Just then, Rose knocks on the door and Tim goes to answer. The neighbor insists something is happening and demands to see Abby, but Tim turns her away. Meanwhile, Abby frees herself from the ropes and arms herself with a knife, but the robot grabs her by the throat when Rose drives her car into the glass window. Tim and Abby watch the surviving window, which starts to crumble a minute later. Rose rushes in and pins the robot against the wall with a sharp stake, but she also falls. Tim turns off, and Abby rushes to the neighbor, but the robot suddenly activates and kills Rose with a kitchen knife, explaining that now Abby will be blamed for the murder, as he leaves no fingerprints. He then calls the police in Abby's voice, confessing to the murder of her husband and his mistress. Abby tries to stop Tim, and he slips up, saying he still has a deactivation phrase, as otherwise he can't function. But she will never say those words. He prepares to throw her off the terrace, simulating an accident, when Abby confesses her love to him, thus deactivating the robot. Those were the code words. Barely believing in her rescue, Abby looks at her medical bracelet, which indicates she is pregnant. The movie ends here. In a small provincial town in Pennsylvania, life flows peacefully and calmly. Milton Robinson, a 79-year-old widower and one of its citizens, leads the life of a simple retiree. He regularly attends town council meetings where he always raises the same issues about changing the town's slogan and installing an additional pedestrian crosswalk near his home. One summer morning, after presenting his proposals as usual, Milton heads home. He spends his day with his daily chores, has dinner, and goes to bed. In the morning, he waters his azaleas and feeds the birds. Later, his adult daughter Denise comes to help him with his monthly bills. There's no news from his elder son Tim, as he lives far away and rarely calls. After finishing their business, Denise goes to the restroom and finds a jar of peas there. She's concerned about her father's well-being, and even though Milton assures her he's fine, she suggests he see a neurologist for a checkup. After all, the man is quite old, and forgetfulness could be a sign of approaching dementia. However, Milton vehemently opposes seeing any doctors. Denise goes to work, leaving the old man alone with his beloved detective shows and a solitary dinner. One night he suddenly hears a commotion in his backyard, and going outside, he sees a flying saucer that has landed awkwardly. Milton calls the rescue service, but they remind him that joking with such a serious organization is a matter for the authorities. They no longer answer his calls, so he dials Denise's number, but she is unavailable. After a restless night, he heads to the town council meeting, where as always he talks about the slogan and the crosswalk. At night, the old man hears strange sounds from the backyard, goes out to see what else has happened, and finds an injured extraterrestrial being in his patio. Once again, he tries to reach his daughter, but Denise, as always, is unreachable. He leaves a voicemail and waits for a call, but it's all in vain. The next morning, as usual, he attends the meeting. His friend Sandy this time proposes a new project for interacting with the youth. She has put up posters around the town and would be delighted if someone came to listen to her stories and advice. She is eager to be part of the lives of lonely young people who need friends. When it's Milton's turn, he starts with the town's motto and the crosswalk as usual, but after that he talks about the UFO that ruined his flowers and broke the bird feeder. However, nobody believes him, considering it the ramblings of an elderly man. Two active retirees, Sandy and Joyce, advise Milton not to bring up this topic at the meeting anymore, or else no one will take the suggestions of the elderly townspeople seriously. Sandy suggests giving the old man a ride home and reminds him that she is always nearby and he can count on her help. Milton becomes angry, realizing that he is being taken for a lunatic. That evening, Milton checks his backyard again to see the extraterrestrial being whom he had thought was dead, but the creature suddenly raises its head and looks at him plaintively. Milton wraps the unconscious extraterrestrial in a blanket again and leaves a glass of water for it. In the morning, he finds the extraterrestrial wrapped in a blanket and seemingly shivering at his back door. Milton invites it inside since it's warmer in the house. He doesn't know what to do because he has never experienced anything like this before. The old man notices that the visitor has drunk all the water, so he brings another glass. Then he prepares a tray with various foods he finds in his house, but the extraterrestrial chooses only an apple. So, Milton goes to the store to buy apples, explaining to the cashier that it's for an extraterrestrial. The cashier treats him like a crazy person with delusions. Upon returning home, Milton sits on the couch in the living room and hears news about the search for a crashed weather satellite, but doesn't pay it much attention because he is startled by the sudden appearance of the extraterrestrial. Seeing that it's feeling much better and can even walk, the old man shows the extraterrestrial all the amenities and settles it in his home, providing a guest room and introducing it to television. Personally, he prefers detective shows because you never know how they will end. Milton shows photos of his family to the silent but attentive extraterrestrial. Unfortunately, his wife is no longer with them. His son has moved to California and his daughter visits him occasionally. Then the old man remembers the dance show and sits in front of the TV, inviting the extraterrestrial to join. On that day, the store clerk tells Denise about her father's strange statements about the extraterrestrial, and she goes to visit him during her lunch break. Milton meets her at the door, and as always, she insists on him seeing a doctor because she is very concerned about his mental health. Milton reluctantly agrees. Denise rushes off, and as soon as she leaves, the phone rings. It's Sandy, urgently needing a printer, and Milton invites her to come over and print the necessary documents. The woman arrives, and upon entering, sees the extraterrestrial. Milton introduces them to each other and shows the crash site. The woman is shocked, but tells Milton that they must keep this a secret for his own safety. She mentions how she has seen on TV how authorities treat poor extraterrestrials, and he shouldn't let anyone into his home except her. Sandy leaves, but Joyce has already noticed her car outside Milton's house and becomes curious about what's happening. Meanwhile, on TV, calls continue for the population to search for the crashed satellite. Time passes, and the extraterrestrial continues to stay in Milton's house, watching his favorite shows together. One morning, it brings Milton a piece of paper with a drawing of a cat on it. This touches Milton's heart, as the little one has drawn him a picture. He finds the extraterrestrial working on repairing its spaceship, apparently having fully recovered and getting ready to go back home. Soon, Milton visits a neurologist and undergoes tests, making some frustrating mistakes in some of them. During this time, Sandy stays with the extraterrestrial and complains to it about her daughter, who moved to the West Coast and lives with her friend. She is very upset that her daughter doesn't visit and doesn't bring her only grandchild. Meanwhile, the doctor, upon learning about Milton's forgetfulness and his stories about extraterrestrials, concludes that his abilities are deteriorating rapidly and suggests considering outside assistance for him. This greatly upsets Milton, and he angrily leaves after shouting at his daughter. Sandy, setting aside the children's book she was reading to the extraterrestrial, tries to ask questions, but the old man goes to his room. Later, he finds the extraterrestrial by its spaceship and complains about his daughter, who wants to put him in a nursing home. He hasn't been in touch with his son, and it seems he was a bad father. The extraterrestrial listens very attentively to the old man, putting down its tools. After this, Milton leaves a voicemail for his son, telling him about his life and Denise's affairs, hoping that he will find it interesting. The next day, Sandy brings a t-shirt for the extraterrestrial as she thinks it's uncomfortable for it to be naked. She also suggests giving it a name, Jules. Milton gets irritated by what he considers silly suggestions but eventually agrees with his friend. Meanwhile, Joyce, upon hearing about the government's offer of a reward for information about the crashed satellite, goes to Milton's house and, looking through the window, sees the extraterrestrial. Now she is also in on Milton's secret and suggests naming the extraterrestrial Harry. Sandy suggests to Milton that he should acknowledge the fact that Joyce is joining their group, even though he's ready to kill the overly curious lady. Then she shows pictures of cats that Jules has drawn for him. Joyce speculates that Jules is trying to communicate something to the old man since all the drawings are of cats. However, Milton refuses to believe it. Meanwhile, the government receives numerous calls about various anomalies. One day, a woman complains about a man who spends hours staring at his rocket in the yard. FBI agents go to the given address but find a homemade rocket and a happy man next to it. At the same time, Joyce visits Milton to spend time with the extraterrestrial. She also gives it a t-shirt and offers it apples. During this time, Sandy receives a call from a young man who was interested in her posters. He comes to her house and the joyful woman invites him for tea. While Joyce talks to the extraterrestrial about her life in the big city, where she even performed in concerts because she sang well, Sandy engages in conversation with the guest and Joyce suggests singing for the extraterrestrial. While she does that, the young man asks for permission to use Sandy's restroom, but when she follows him upstairs, she sees him stealing her jewelry. After she threatens to call the police, the man attacks her and tries to strangle her. However, the extraterrestrial has a vision of the events and telepathically makes the man's head explode. This raises suspicions at the FBI, who are conducting the search for the crashed spaceship. Responding to police questions, Sandy suddenly realizes who saved her from certain death and rushes to Milton's house. She hugs Jules and tearfully thanks him for saving her life. The retirees discuss the potential danger of the extraterrestrial, but conclude that it's only dangerous to bad people. Meanwhile, the FBI agents can't understand how and from what the head of the criminal could have burst, so they decide to keep an eye on Sandy. On this day, Denise meets the elderly folks at the store and again brings up the topic of the apples Milton bought. However, Milton avoids the conversation. Later, the group has lunch at Milton's house when Sandy notices a strange smell. When they go outside, they discover a dead cat that Jules apparently brought there. Connecting all the facts, the retirees realize that the extraterrestrial needs cats for some reason, and now there are not 7, as in the picture, but 6. Milton calls Denise, hoping to find out where she disposes of the deceased cats in her clinic, which frightens her completely. Not receiving a clear answer, Milton and Sandy decide to drive around the streets of the town since cats often meet their fate under car wheels. On the road, Milton inquires about Sandy's husband's illness, which eventually led to his passing, and she talks about being left alone. She starts asking questions, reassuring that life must go on. However, at this point, Milton asks her to stop the car, and the FBI agents become witnesses as the elderly couple loads a deceased cat into the trunk. That day, they find 2 more cats, and Joyce promises to find the rest. Meanwhile, FBI agents eavesdrop on the private conversations of Milton's close ones and hear Denise telling her brother about her father's eccentricities. At this moment, Joyce brings 3 more cats she found in different parts of the town. Only one is missing. Just then, agents knock on the door, but the elderly folks hide and don't open it. The men eventually leave, and the people realize they need to act quickly. And then, Milton remembers Joyce's deaf, blind, and non-mobile cat. Offended, she leaves, but Sandy catches up with her and apologizes for Milton's bluntness. Joyce admits that he's right. It's long past time to end the suffering of the cat. She brings the animal, and the extraterrestrial puts it to eternal sleep. Then it covers the remains with some material, and they start to merge into a single object. In the end, a glowing object appears in front of the group, which serves as fuel for Jules's spaceship. The saucer lifts off into the air and moves to the center of the yard, which is instantly detected by the FBI's instruments. The retirees understand that the time for farewell has come. Joyce gives Jules a souvenir globe with a view of the city inside. Sandy gives him a sweater she knitted, and Milton gives him his driver's license with a photo. But the extraterrestrial suddenly makes an inviting gesture, clearly offering them to join, and Milton suddenly decides to accept the invitation. But then the phone rings in the house, and picking up the receiver he hears Denise's voice. She suggests meeting on Saturday. They'll have lunch and then she'll give him a haircut because they've been arguing, and that's not right. At that moment, agents knock on the door, Milton rushes into the yard, and they only manage to see the departing saucer, where 3 Earthlings joined in the last moment. The ship lands not far from the town to safely disembark the elderly and bid them a peaceful farewell. Milton hugs the extraterrestrial and thanks it for the invitation to travel together, but he can't leave his home and loved ones behind. Jules enters the spaceship and flies away while the elderly folks wave goodbye to him. Time passes. Milton continues to live in his home, visited by Sandy and Joyce. The elderly often reminisce about Jules' Harry and hope that he hasn't forgotten them either. And one night, Milton's yard is illuminated by a bright light, and the old man realizes that he has guests. A light, heartwarming, and slightly melancholic film about the fading of human life. It's good that amid the plethora of recently produced nonsense, there are still such heartfelt and warm movies in which an extraterrestrial is not a villain who came to Earth to conquer it, but rather a cute and understanding silent being with expressive eyes. Many years ago, humanity did indeed colonize Mars, where cities and villages were built, and Nikolai established a whole farm where he operates with his family and helper robots. However, the grasping hands of the oligarchy reached even to the Red Planet. In the year 2085, a young man named Konstantin is preoccupied with wealth and readily takes on any projects promising profit. His friend, Nikolai, bets on intelligence. Konstantin passionately invents a device that will help translocate consciousness, which he aptly names the Translocator. Konstantin immediately comes up with a catchy slogan for selling the device, but Nikolai tempers his friend's enthusiasm, as it's not even clear if this translocator works. So, Konstantin promises to bring a rat for an experiment, but instead brings a man named Vitaly, who is willing to swap consciousness with a dog, as it could be a ticket back home. His wife loves dogs. Nikolai refuses to conduct experiments on a human, even though Konstantin has already paid the man with money borrowed from his mother. Now he desperately needs results. Therefore, Konstantin conducts the experiment himself. Nikolai arrives when the man is already convulsing inside the device's force field. He tries to turn off the device, but at that moment it shuts down on its own because the transference is complete. However, the test subject makes no sound, and the frightened men attempt to get confirmation of the experiment's success from the dog. But the dog remains silent, while Vitaly speaks up, signaling a failure. The 2 men react differently to the failure. Konstantin is ashamed that at the age of 25, he's still asking for money from his mother. Meanwhile, Nikolai suggests starting a company with the slogan, "A robot in every home," and producing affordable helpers for every citizen. And if that doesn't work out, he plans to buy land on Mars and establish a farm there. 15 years later, Nikolai enjoys family life on Mars and manages his robotic farm. He films reports about his farm, showcasing the dairy products he's obtained through hard work, and introduces his helpers, robots, Galasha, Stepan, and Valera. The sentient tractor, Mitya, gets upset with his forgetful owner, but Nikolai quickly rectifies the situation and waves at him. Nikolai also has a favorite hobby, breeding copters, which greatly annoys his wife Nadezhda, as he spends a lot of money on his pastime. After deflecting her complaints by claiming he's shooting a promotional video, Nikolai shows his subscribers a drink made from tea fungus and introduces his eldest daughter, Marina, who is not enthusiastic about farm life at all. And after that, Nikolai presents his younger daughter, Lyudmila, who is passionate about constructing cyber weather installations in the form of Russian birches. There are 4 such birches controlling the weather in the entire region, which the girl enthusiastically demonstrates to the audience. Afterwards, the guy settles into his cyber bread box and flies to the landfill, which is regularly replenished with waste from Earth. There, he accidentally finds a discarded but fully functional robot. His wife, Nadezhda, is angry with her husband for bringing all sorts of junk into the house. However, he plans to name the discovery Vova and integrate it into their household, to which accommodating Nadezhda reluctantly agrees, but she prefers to call the robot Vanya. In conclusion, Nikolai invites good people to come to Mars, build, develop, and enjoy life, a sentiment echoed by his entire family. However, while relaxing in the evening amidst the idyllic Russian natural landscape, Nadezhda has serious doubts that anyone will heed their call. Meanwhile, the CEO of a major corporation, Konstantin Baragozin, is indulging in some pool time while contemplating his portrait on the moon when he is informed about the arrival of shareholders. Irritated, he wonders why his assistant Pavel couldn't come up with some excuse. However, Pavel has already exhausted all the reasons Konstantin could use to decline the meeting. At that moment, a button pops off from the CEO's jacket, right in the hands of a robot, who is promptly discarded. Konstantin angrily insults the shareholders who have just entered his office, and they begin to ask uncomfortable questions. Failing to provide clear answers, he is threatened with a change in leadership. He reminds them that Izhevsk Dynamics is his brainchild, and it was he who came up with the slogan about robots in every home. To this, they respond that the controlling stake of shares is in their hands. Konstantin urgently needs to come up with something positive, which he passes on to his assistant. Unable to think of anything better, Pavel announces the construction of a new factory on Mars. The shareholders like the idea, and Konstantin is given 1 month to execute it. In turn, he delegates the task of starting construction to Pavel. However, it turns out that the eccentric person who built the farm in the right location refuses to sell it for any amount of money. Konstantin orders that this stubborn person be shown to him and is surprised to see his childhood friend, Nikolai. Meanwhile, on Mars, a new day begins. Lyudmila sifts through the old remnants of her father's inventions and finds the translocator, but Nikolai brushes off her questions because they have a more interesting task at hand: activating the new robot. When turned on, it starts searching for a rag to perform the task of floor cleaning. At that moment, spaceships land on the farm, and from the largest one emerges a delegation led by Konstantin, who rushes to embrace his old friend. However, Nikolai isn't particularly thrilled with the guests. Konstantin is amazed by the abundance of goats, which have long been extinct on Earth. But Nikolai doesn't want to talk about his achievements because he's deeply resentful of Konstantin's underhanded takeover of their joint company. Konstantin suggests putting the past behind them and offers a huge sum of money, enough for Nikolai to settle anywhere, even on Jupiter's moon, Europa. For this suggestion, he immediately receives a punch in the face. Enraged, the director signals his assistant to read out a decree declaring the corporation as the owner of Mars, and the demolition of the farm buildings begins immediately. This is when Nadezhda steps into the fray, but Konstantin's henchmen grab the family and lock them in a hangar. Suddenly, the man realizes that the robot Vanya is missing and sees that it is still carrying out its task. Nikolai outwits the guards and escapes from the hangar, while Konstantin's assistant tries to persuade his boss to be more lenient, since evicting people from their homes is illegal. For this, he promptly loses his job. Meanwhile, Konstantin finds a sink and starts washing up, taking off his expensive jacket, which the robot Vanya promptly mistakes for a rag and adapts it to clean the floor. An infuriated Konstantin runs after the robot, but at that moment, the workers dismantle the farm's generators, and Nikolai, who has rushed into the barn, shoves his former friend, causing him to land precisely in the translocator chair. The device activates. When it all ends, Nikolai tries to activate Vanya, but it suddenly starts speaking with Konstantin's intonation and threatens to destroy the entire farm. Seeing the man's body, the robot begins to scream, realizing that its consciousness has ended up in Vanya's body. Nikolai is pleased that the translocator works, and the robot becomes angry, demanding to be returned. Meanwhile, Konstantin's body begins to behave erratically, which his assistant notices. Pavel orders that the suffering CEO be taken away, pushing aside the annoying piece of machinery. Nikolai sees Konstantin being loaded onto a spaceship, where his family is, and rushes after them, but the spaceship takes off, leaving Nikolai and Vanya with the CEO's consciousness in an iron head. At night, Nikolai fixes his car, all while enduring Konstantin's reproaches, who demands that the man urgently take him back to Earth, for which they need to reach the train station. Nikolai scolds the inept CEO, who then sets off on foot but gets stuck in Martian sand. In the morning, Nikolai finds him, and upon hearing his promise not to interfere with the farm, digs out the robot and drives it to the train station, encountering a Martian sandstorm along the way. Meanwhile, Konstantine's assistant returns home, where he is greeted by his wife and children. He has to admit that he got fired. Galina reminds him that their family is drowning in subscriptions for the apartment, for the car, for the new renovation. They'll have to give up Italian wallpaper and designer furniture. And tomorrow, their subscription for the refrigerator expires. Maybe they should ask Baragozin for leniency. After all, it's all for the family. Meanwhile, on Mars, Nikolai frees himself from the sand-covered car and locates Vanya's head by his voice. Searching further, he finds Vanya's body, which he has to catch up to. After assembling the robot, he digs out the car, and Vanya confesses that the train they're rushing to is the last one, because nobody should know about the construction of the new factory. Finally, the couple manages to pull out the car, but it refuses to start, so Nikolai forces Vanya to apologize to the supposedly offended car, laughing at the absurdity. After that, the car starts and speeds towards the train station. At the same time, Pavel arrives at the office and sees damaged robots, scattered belongings, and an incoherent CEO who makes him eat soap. He calls a doctor who gives a startling diagnosis. Baragozin's memories and personality have been erased, and his level of development is that of a 1-year-old child. Meanwhile, Nikolai's car approaches the city of Marsyansk when an elderly woman flags them down, asking for a ride to the train station. The old lady takes a liking to Vanya, reminiscing about her own robot, Grishka. She had sold her land to Baragozin's company, received a gift, and got a train ticket. Nikolai asks the old lady to share her thoughts about the oligarch, because he can convey people's opinions to him. The elderly lady begins to express her desires, which Vanya has to confirm. Finally, the group arrives at the train station. Nikolai says goodbye to the car and sends it home. The people and the robot then board an interorbital elevator and ascend to the platforms. However, there are no tickets left for the train to Earth. Nikolai tries to negotiate with the conductor when Vanya notices a ticket with the elderly fellow passenger. Meanwhile, on Earth, Galina seeks details about the incident from her husband. It turns out that Baragozin won't start speaking and thinking somewhat normally for at least a year or two. She advises her husband not to tell anyone anything and to become the leader of the corporation and to raise a good person out of the former CEO. Pavel disagrees and the woman speaks, and he pauses her. He works to fulfill all her wishes, but she's putting pressure on him. However, in reality, she's just a hologram, just like the children she made him subscribe to, even though they don't even resemble him. After expressing all his grievances, the man unpauses Galina, who, upon realizing that he had paused her, becomes furious with accusations, as he doesn't even understand what it's like. She's not doing it for herself but wants to make him successful and wealthy. He deserves it, after all. Pavel asks her to reduce the vanilla quotes option, and the hologram complies with his wishes but continues to pressure her husband. Meanwhile, Vanya brings a ticket to Nikolai, and the couple boards the train. But then, the man sees the elderly lady from earlier outside the window who can't find her ticket, and realizes where the robot got it. Vanya, pretending to be Konstantin, promises to send a shuttle for the old lady when they reach Earth, but Nikolai knows the true value of his promises. He demands that the robot apologize, return the ticket, and put the grandmother on the train. Vanya literally tosses the old lady into a moving car when the grandmother standing on the platform addresses them. It turns out that Vanya put a completely different grandmother in the car. Nikolai sends Vanya to catch up with the train and remove the wrong grandmother, while he helps the actual traveler catch up with the car. But the grandmother activates the rocket engine on her suitcase trolley and catches up with the train herself. The train departs. Vanya expresses everything he thinks about Nikolai's softness, which caused their separation in the first place. Then Nikolai switches Vanya to vacuum cleaner mode, and it starts cleaning the platform, threatening Nikolai with dire consequences when it returns to its body. Vanya finds a space mail ticket. Nikolai has an epiphany. The couple heads to the post office. At the same time, Pavel is getting ready to sleep in Baragozin's residence when Galina reminds him of certain options that were not available to them. Nikolai and Vanya set out on their journey to Earth in a postal box, but there's a mix-up at the sorting, and the package veers off course to Pluto. Meanwhile, Nikolai's family returns to Mars in a hacked rescue capsule, landing in the desert. They immediately spot their car passing by. That's where the second episode ends. Folks, if you're interested in finding out what happens next, please write about it in the comments, and we'll shoot the continuation. Turid Sayer, together with her teenage sons, Magne and Lauritz, returned to the Norwegian city of Edda after many years of absence. At the entrance to the city, their car gets stuck behind an old man in an electric wheelchair who is trying to turn right. Magnay gets out of the car to help, and the old man's wife approaches him. Looking into the guy's eyes, she smiles with satisfaction. He's a good boy, and then she touches his forehead. Magnay's iris changes color for a moment, and then the guy feels something unusual in the perception of the world. He returns to the car and, trying to close the window, breaks off the window lifter handle. Stunned, Magnay turns the thing in his hands and suddenly says that it's going to rain. Mother and brother laugh. There is not a cloud in the sky, and immediately the car is showered with a heavy rain. They continue on their way and get to their grandmother's old house. Lauritz is not happy that there is a shabby-looking trailer near the house, and Magnay picks up an advertisement that calls for making the air of the city cleaner. The next morning, the guys go to school. Oddly enough, the brothers are assigned to the same class. The thing is, Magnay is dyslexic, which is expressed by difficulties with word recognition and insufficient abilities in reading and writing. Magnay's attention is immediately drawn to a pretty blonde, Gry, but Lauritz is ahead of him, and Magnay has to sit in the back of the class next to Isolde, who is not popular at school. A lesson on the Scandinavian gods begins, and Magnay learns that Edda is the last Norwegian city to convert to Christianity. It was here that Ragnarok took place, during which the gods died and the fate of the giants remained unknown. During lunch, Magnay sits at Isolde's desk again and learns that she's on the side of the Greens and is fighting against the pollution of the world. She also introduces the guy to Fjord Utol as son of the owner of the Utol Industries factories, Fjord's sister Saxa, and their mother, the director of the school by the name of Ran. And then she talks about her blog on YouTube. At the end of the classes, the two leave school together, and then Isolde notices that one of the wheels in her bicycle is bent. Much to girl's astonishment, Magnay easily fixes the brake and returns the wheel to its original condition, which surprises him as well. In addition, he notices that his eyesight has begun to improve. The next day, he, Isolde, and Gry get a general assignment in sociology and begin to study democracy. Magnay suggests studying the topic by using their town as an example. At this moment, he sees his mother, who has come to talk to the director. The women discuss boy's progress at school and recall the tragedy that happened many years ago when the boy's father died under mysterious circumstances. Later, the mother notices that Magnay is not wearing any glasses and does not understand how this can be. But she's distracted by Vidar Utol's car. It turns out that she and Vidar have known each other for a long time. After returning home, Vidar tells his wife Ran about the meeting with the woman, while their children Fjord and Saxa discuss their appearance and whether it matches their age. Vidar gives them a task to follow Magnay, who is currently engaged in repairs and notices a rune carved on his father's tools. Later, the guy visits Isolde's page and looks through her materials about the strange death of the fish in the fjord. The next day, the girl invites him to her place and reminds him that he no longer needs glasses. While choosing water in the store, she explains to Magnay that he can't drink tap water in Edda, and the store clerk suddenly warns the guy about the danger of the vernal equinox. In Isolde's house, the guy finds out that the history teacher, Erich, is the girl's father. At dinner, she invites him to go with her to the mountain as she monitors the speed at which the glacier is melting. They can go down by paragliding. The girl asks her father questions about her mother's death, but he keeps silent. Magnay shares his memories of his father, and sweeping the girl's diary off the table, finds out that she has been hopelessly in love with Saxa for a long time. The next day, he tells his classmates about the upcoming hike in the mountains, while Fjord invites everyone to a party at his house. Returning home, Magnay finds his mother repairing the fence, and his attention is drawn to his father's sledgehammer marked with the rune. The next day, Magnay and Isolde go to the mountains. Soon they reach a blocked bridge, but Magnay resolutely steps over the warning sign. Suddenly, the boy gets a text that his mother is unwell. He hurries to the city and Isolde goes on alone. Meanwhile, Vidar's car is driving along the mountain road. Stopping on the side of the road, Vidar goes outside, undresses, and starts hunting deer grazing on the mountain. With one blow, he kills the animal and rips out its heart. Meanwhile, Isolde reaches the glacier and sees her marks. She takes water samples and then notices the thawed entrance to the cave and photographs it. Once inside, she finds a door blocking the entrance to the depth of the cave. Standing over the fjord, Vidar eats the raw heart of the deer and emits a heart-rending cry, which frightens Isolde. Upon reaching home, Magne discovers that his mother is absolutely fine and, angry at his brother's stupid joke, goes outside. He sees Isolde paragliding down the mountain. Suddenly, the paraglider starts drifting towards electric wires. The guy hurries to the crash site and finds the girl's lifeless body. Vidar also arrives and tries to help her and then calls for an ambulance, but nothing can be done anymore. Returning home, Magne throws away his glasses and sees the sledgehammer. The distraught guy throws the hammer and it disappears into the clouds, which are instantly covered with lightning. After everything that happened, Magne is taking the death of her friend hard and decides never to wear glasses again. The classmates ask a lot of questions about the girl's death, but he can't say anything definite. He enters the classroom and sits down at the desk whose second half is covered with flowers and burning candles. Ren makes an announcement that there will be no history class today, but suddenly Isolde's father enters the classroom. He cannot stay at home alone. The man asks the school not to cancel the vernal equinox holiday because Isolde would be against such a decision. Later, the police announce that the girl's death was caused by a thunderstorm strike to the dome of the paraglider. But Magne objects. Everything happened before his eyes, and there was no thunderstorm at that time. Nevertheless, the case is being closed. On the same day, Vidar asks Stuart to get the insurance money for his car, which was smashed by some madman. And he sends the woman photos in which Stuart recognizes the sledgehammer. She hurries home to ask Magne questions, but he himself is shocked by such an accusation. The guy calculates how far he threw the hammer, 1,537 meters. But this is impossible. Magne buys a new sledgehammer and throws it in a deserted place late at night. And then he calculates the distance, 541 meters, which is several times higher than the world's record for hammer throwing. Meanwhile, Vidar examines the sledgehammer while Ren speaks about the experiences of the school children who sincerely mourn the dead girl. And then the husband suddenly admits that he killed Isolde because she found the entrance to the cave. The woman gets angry. They agreed not to touch the children, but since it happened, they need to find Isolde's lost phone. At school, Gry and Magne continue to work on the project together and listen to a warning not to blame the destruction of the planet only on the rich. Later at home, sorting out his mother's things, Laurits finds an old blouse. Magne invites Gry to work at his house, which leads to a heartfelt conversation about Magne's past. Meanwhile, Turid notices Erich in the store looking lost. She expresses sympathy and the man is grateful to her for it. Laurits finds Magne watching the weather forecast. Magne insists that there was no thunderstorm the day Isolde died, and then he admits that it was he who threw the sledgehammer into Vidar's car. But his brother doesn't believe it. The celebration of the vernal equinox begins at school. The classmates show Saxa a photo of an improvised altar at the site of Isolde's death, while Vidar inspects this area in search of the girl's phone. He notices that Magne is visiting the place too. At school, everyone is shocked by the sight of Laurits, who came to the evening in his mother's blouse and with makeup. The headmistress opens the evening and offers a moment of silence for Isolde. Saxa sings a song about her native land, which is interrupted by the appearance of Magne. Later, Laurits advises his brother to forget about Gry because Fjord is already hitting on her. Later, Laurits starts hitting on Yakutu. Then the headmistress takes the two boys away. Magne sits down with Gry, but Fjord invites the girl to a dance, and the guy has nothing to do but sit and watch. Watching them, he crushes the bottle in his hand and it shatters into small pieces. He goes to the men's room where he meets Oscar, whose mother is a police officer, and he blurts out that the girl died from hitting a rock. At this time, hot dancing begins in the hall, and Magne sees the headmistress surrounded by boys. Fjord puts on his music and he and Saxa begin a strange sensual dance to which Laurits joins. The three of them squirm on the dance floor much to the delight and astonishment of the crowd. Magne goes to Isolde's father's house and informs him about the change in the cause of his daughter's death. He is sure that the police are lying, but the inconsolable father asks to not disturb the peace of his dead daughter. Out of anger, Magne easily moves the multi-ton car in front of the house, which terrifies Erich. At this time, Fjord, Laurits and Oscar are going to the altar, and younger Utul, ridiculing people's stupid beliefs, urinates on the burning candles. Oscar manages to record this and upload everything to the internet. Fjord orders the video to be deleted, but it has already gone online. Magne is reviewing numerous notes about violations of environmental regulations by Utul Industries, which Eric shows him, and he throws away the girl's diary because she has the right to personal secrets. And at Utul's house, the owner is feeding his dog when Ran shows him a scandalous photo from the altar. The husband promises to deal with this issue. Saxa is trying to find out at least something new about Magne from Gry, who stayed overnight at their house, but she does not know anything. She goes to the bathroom and witnesses Vidar beating his son. The man is furious. People worship them too and sacrifice to them. Therefore his son insulted him with his act too. Frightened, Gry hurries to take refuge in Saxa's room. The next day, Isolde's funeral takes place and everyone goes to church, but returning home, the Sayer family finds their home trashed. The brothers go to the homeless neighbor, accusing him of stealing from their house. He admits that he has been in the apartment, but only after another man who arrived there in a big black car accompanied by a dog. The brothers realize that it is Vidar but do not understand why he needed it. Later, Magne goes to see a therapist. He feels that everything has changed around him but does not find an explanation for this. He talks about the robbery and accuses the police of inaction, and the therapist tells Ran about the session. Back home, Magne tells his mother about the conversation with the neighbor and blames Vidar, but Turid says that it's absurd and does not want to hear anything about it, especially since Eric has arrived. He hands Isolde's laptop to Magne because his computer is already failing. The guy searches the computer and finds data on changes in natural conditions in the vicinity of Edda. The same evening, Ran tells her husband about the therapy session. She is furious. Not only did Vidar break into Magne's house, but the guy's neighbor saw him. And now everyone can find out about this inexplicable case. The next day, Gry confesses to Fjord that she saw the beating, and it shocked her. But he changes the topic of the conversation. The girl agrees to ride with him, but Lauritz and Saxa are also in the car. Meanwhile, Magne is talking to a police representative again. He knows for sure that there was no wind that day, but the woman objects. He said that he got to the city in half an hour and no one can do that. The young people are driving along a mountain road and Fjord puts on a song in the ancient Icelandic language, which is surprising to Gry. Suddenly, a bird breaks against the windshield of the car. Saxa and Fjord come out to look at it. The sister reminds them of the need to learn at least something about Magne and eats the bird. Puzzled by the officer's words, Magne goes to a deserted warehouse and starts jogging to see how fast he runs. He does a 100-meter dash in just 7 seconds. Meanwhile, Eric has given Isolde's jacket, which has traces of blood on it, and Vidar follows Magne and witnesses an accident in which the guy is hit by a snowplow. He joyfully announces to the family about Magne's death, who interfered with their affairs. Then Vidar confesses to the children that he killed Isolde because she found dangerous things hidden by them in the glacier. Ran reminds them of the danger they are exposed to by getting close to mortals. Meanwhile, the doctors at the hospital are perplexed. The guy who was hit by the snowplow has no injuries at all. Magne goes home, and he doesn't know that at this very moment the body of his deceased neighbor, who was a witness to the robbery of their house, was being brought to the morgue. At home, Turid thanks the gods for saving her child's life, and Magne makes another note. He is now also invulnerable. His sight and sense of smell also have improved. The next day, during the lesson, there is a skirmish when Magne blames the Utul plants for the emissions of harmful substances which caused the inhabitants of the fjord to die. Saxa resolutely defends her father. After the lesson, Magne asks the teacher to test the dried blood from Isolde's jacket. He is sure that there's someone else's blood on the clothes. At least they smell different. The woman is surprised by his sense of smell and agrees to run the test. Later, Gry asks him questions about the incident. He shows her the jacket and asks her to smell it, but the girl does not detect the difference at all. In the afternoon, a group of classmates goes to a cafe where Oscar breaks the news about Ran's behavior the previous evening, which he learned about from his friends. Saxa is outraged by the silly rumors and stirs the conversation towards Gry, who is still a virgin. This pisses Gry off, and she goes home where she finds her father in front of a can of beer. The man is upset. The insurance company refused to pay him money for his sick lungs. no one sees the connection between the disease and the emissions from the U2 factories. Meanwhile, Vidar is raging in his house. No mortal could have survived. Who is this guy? To which Rand promises to find out everything very soon, since in the evening the brothers will come to them for dinner. Magne and Lauritz go to the Utul house, unaware that they are the only guests of the evening. They are seated at a chic table and are treated to alcoholic drinks. The hosts do not skimp on the drinks. Vidar pours Magne mead, the drink of the ancient gods. Feeling intoxicated, Magne begins to behave inappropriately, and throwing an axe at the target hanging on the wall simply breaks it. And then he confides in Ren about his new strength. The woman is surprised and offers to fight with her hands. The guy promises to defeat her and holds out his hand. They begin to fight, and Magne realizes that he cannot defeat the fragile-looking woman. They fight without restraining themselves, and at some point he suddenly sees the true appearance of an ancient monster hiding behind the guise of the beauty. At this moment the table breaks down. Jumping up from behind the wreckage, Magne sees the woman in front of him again. He goes to the bathroom and after washing his face, looks up at the mirror and suddenly sees the face of an ancient warrior staring back at him. Coming up next, a recap of the following episodes.